focusing on pretty extensively is Nolan's secret lineage. We've got 2 references to his history across 2 seasons, and one of the conclusions that the Viltrumites come to is just baffling for those of us who have read the comics. But what's even more baffling is the fact that we never get the full picture when it comes to Nolan's background. We eventually find out who one of his parents is, but the other one remains an eternal mystery. In this video, we will try to unravel that mystery and try to answer the question that nobody asked. Who was Omni-Man's mom? So put on your spoiler hats and strap them in tight, because this video will ruin a few things for you guys. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Nolan's lineage and why it matters. Let's start off with the most obvious question that brought us to this video. Why exactly does Nolan's lineage matter? In Amazon's Invincible, his heritage is under close scrutiny by the Viltrumites because apparently none of them thought to DNA test their soldiers for thousands of years. That's true for the comics as well, but the show is putting it under the spotlight for a reason. This is a major spoiler, so proceed at your own risk, but turns out Nolan is supposed to be the rightful leader of the Viltrumites, not Thrag. That's because he is the son of Argyle, the first emperor of the Viltrum Empire. Thrag was appointed Grand Regent after Argyle's death, and one of his main tasks as regent was to find his heirs. This is because Argyle never kept them in one place, and hid their identities on a list that was lost to the Viltrumites after the Scourge virus hit them. For thousands of years, Thrag effectively reigned as emperor because he pretty much took over for Argyle, and after surviving the Scourge, his focus was on rebuilding his race's population, not looking for lost princes. That could explain why Nolan never triggered a red flag in the Viltrumites' systems, because perhaps he was just too powerful to need any kind of testing. We find that hard to believe considering he was definitely alive when the Scourge virus was decimating his people. There is no way he wasn't given some kind of treatment that could have revealed the truth about his lineage, but for some reason, it doesn't happen until after his son gets infected by the same thing. As soon as Thrag learns who Argyle's true heir is, he tries to kill both Mark and Nolan because he knows how Viltrumite loyalty works. When his soldiers hear the news, they will abandon him and flock to Nolan immediately, so if he wants to preserve his power, he needs to move quickly. Unfortunately for Thrag, none of his moves are successful, and Nolan eventually takes control of the Viltrumites, putting them on a more righteous path. But even after Invincible ends, we never quite find out who Nolan's mom was, which is odd, considering how big of a role Debbie played in Mark's life. In many ways, Mark and Nolan are parallels, with their stories and lives having similar trajectories, so it only stands to reason that we would, at some point, find out who Omni-Man's mom might have been. But that's a vain hope for a number of reasons. Is there any way of knowing who Omni-Man's mom is? The first reason it is probably going to be impossible to find Nolan's birth mother is the fact that he himself was quote-unquote discovered thousands of years down the line. If Thrag had all the Viltrumites under him DNA tested at the beginning of his reign, perhaps he would have learnt the truth sooner and we'd have a different kind of Viltrumite problem at our hands today. But because that didn't happen, all we have are the facts to go off of, and it is a fact that Nolan's conception itself was a big secret. Emperor Argyle was a man who was loved by his people, but he was hated by millions outside of Viltrum. He had brought death, destruction, and enslavement to so many worlds that it was common sense for him to take extreme measures for his own kids. Argyle ended up sending all the children he'd conceived off to different parts of his empire, under the guard of extremely trusted men, with only a list of their names being proof of their existence. When that disappeared as well, tracking his descendants became nearly impossible, despite the fact that the mothers would have most likely been accompanying his children. And we say mothers, because the way this information is phrased in the comics, it's implied that Argyle had many children with many women. This is consistent with Viltrumite culture, because marriage isn't exactly a concept for them. Viltrumites value strength over everything else. They don't form relationships, they mate. To them, a partner is for entertainment, reproduction, or gauging their own strength, which is why a Viltrumite marriage might look a lot like a world-ending battle. Prospective mates often fight each other to determine their sexual compatibility, and in a society where might makes right, people take whoever they want, whenever they want. In fact, one of the darkest moments from the comics comes from this mentality. At one point, Anissa, who was the first Viltrumite that tried to recruit Mark, sexually assaults him. It's one of the worst things that has happened to him in his entire life, and he isn't able to defend himself because he's still reeling from Eve breaking up with him. Anissa basically beats Mark into submission and has her way with him, telling him to man up in the aftermath. And to us, this is a clear criminal act, but in her society, this is probably just how things go. Anissa took a liking to Mark after she saw him give her father a run for his money in an arm wrestling match. Nolan had assumed his position as the Emperor of Viltrum by this time, and he was one of the strongest Viltrumites in his faction, if not the strongest. Anissa, like a proper old-school Viltrumite, saw Mark's strength and decided she wanted him as her mate. And it was only after she got used to life on Earth and learnt its laws and customs that she realized the horrific nature of her attack. In the end, Anissa ends up redeeming herself by fighting to protect the true love of Mark's life, and even gives him a rather unexpected gift in the form of a son, but you can find out more about that from our videos on Anissa or Marky, aka Kid Invincible. For this video, we just wanted to point out that this mating ritual was probably a thing back in Argyle's time as well, which makes finding Nolan's mother an even tougher task. If the first emperor bred with any woman he took a liking to, then he didn't crown any of them empress, and we have no official records to confirm or deny that. Moreover, the only Viltrumite who is old enough to be Nolan's mom in the series is Thula, and we somehow suspect that she would have remembered giving birth to him. There are only a handful of Viltrumites that survived the collapse and rebuilding of their civilization when Argyle died, and Conquest and Thula are two of them. Thula looks younger than Conquest, to be sure, but her age would have been irrelevant when Nolan was conceived. This is because he was definitely born shortly before or after his father's death, seeing as he didn't exactly participate in the Great Purge. Nolan's earliest memories are of joining up with the World Conquering Committee as a scout and then a field agent, and he doesn't really talk about the Purge as though he's been through it. This means he was definitely in his formative years at the very least during that bloody period of Viltrumite history, and Thula would remember giving birth to her Emperor's child. So no, we have no comic book references to give to you when it comes to Omni-Man's mother, but we might get one in the show at some point, considering the fact that they've taken to expanding characters' backstories. Will we see her in Amazon's Invincible? There is a possibility that we might see who Nolan's mother was in the Amazon adaptation of Invincible, and this is purely based off the fact that they are willing to add in details where the comics skip over them. One of the biggest examples of this is Immortal's near-death flashback reel. In the comics, we only get vague hints about his previous lives, and the only one that's confirmed is the fact that he was Abe Lincoln. But the TV show gave us a montage of how Immortal became immortal, what he did as a Knight of the Round Table, how he came to the New World, and the last time he assumed direct control of humans. A more recent example of Amazon's Invincible fleshing out its characters' backstories better than the original comes from the Invincible War and Mark's fight with Conquest. Many of the evil Invincible variants were given motivations and characterization that was simply missing from the comics, like Masked Mark wanting to kidnap Debbie as his reward for helping Angstrom, and Omni-Mark hating every single thing about his Prime counterpart. They gave Conquest an entire confession about how he feels so lonely because he sits at the top of the mountain, so it's not unreasonable to think we might get a glimpse at Nolan's mother as well. Considering the fact that they've worked his lineage into the main narrative a lot more intricately than the comics did, we wouldn't be surprised to get a flashback scene that shows us Argyle secreting Nolan's mom away to safety. Maybe this flashback comes to us courtesy of the narrator, or maybe it comes from Thrag or Thula if the show decides to have some fun with her character. One thing is certain though, if they decide to give us Omni-Man's mom, she's only going to be a very temporary addition. We might even see her for like a single frame, because it's sad to say this out loud, but Nolan's dad is the one who matters. His mom wasn't in a position of power, neither would her identity impact the story any more than his dad's identity did, so keeping her a mystery was just something that must have happened organically. Still, if we will ever get the answer to the question we asked in this video's title, it will be from Amazon. So let's cross our fingers and hope that Invincible actually has a 10-season run, and that Kirkman starts running out of content to adapt around season 6. Marvelous verdict. Having said that, we want to know your thoughts on this topic, so fire them off in the comments down below and let us know who you think Nolan's mom was. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more Invincible content, and we will see you guys in the next one. Till then, stay safe, and remember to share your secret list of babies with at least one other person to keep your empire from collapsing. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.